0 seconds. A 3-kilometer stony asteroid strikes the deep Atlantic roughly 400 kilometers southeast of New York City at around 20 kilometers per second. Its kinetic energy is approximately 2 million megatons of TNT, 2 teratons. The ocean does not neutralize it. Water has no meaningful resistance to an object moving at this speed. The asteroid punches through and transfers its energy into the water column and seabed below. 4 separate disasters are now moving toward the coast at different speeds. Seismic waves first, then the atmospheric blast, then the tsunami. 1 second later, the Atlantic explodes. A blinding flash erupts from the ocean surface. A column of superheated steam, pulverized seabed rock, salt, and impact debris punches upward through the atmosphere. The water in the immediate impact zone is violently accelerated outward and upward. The asteroid continues into the seafloor, excavating a crater and releasing an enormous pulse of energy into the crust beneath the ocean. Ships within several hundred kilometers don't encounter a wave. They encounter an ocean surface violently deformed on a scale larger than entire cities. 10 seconds later, a hole tens of kilometers wide opens in the ocean. The transient cavity continues expanding outward. Enormous volumes of water have been displaced from where the ocean used to be. The central plume continues rising, punching through cloud layers. Around the rim, the ocean begins collapsing back into the cavity, generating the first outward-moving wave train. Seismic energy is already racing toward North America at several kilometers per second. It will arrive before anything else. 1 minute later, the East Coast feels the impact. Seismic waves reach New York, Long Island, New Jersey, and New England. High-rises sway, suspended lights swing, objects fall from shelves. Bridges and elevated structures vibrate. It feels like an earthquake, because in terms of ground motion, it is 1. People in Manhattan walk toward their windows to look out at the ocean. That becomes a very bad place to stand in the minutes that follow. 911 systems across the Northeast are flooded with calls before authorities have a complete picture of what just hit the Atlantic. 10 minutes later, the tsunami warning becomes terrifying. Detection networks show an extraordinary disturbance spreading from the impact site. Emergency warnings expand along the entire U.S. East Coast. The most immediate concern runs from Long Island through New York Harbor, the Jersey Shore, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. Cape Cod, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and Boston are also threatened. On Fire Island and the Hamptons, people abandon beach houses and run toward whatever higher ground exists, which, on a barrier island, isn't much. Others do the opposite. They drive for the mainland and instantly jam the limited bridges and causeways. In Manhattan, many hear tsunami warning and assume the city's skyscrapers make them safe. They're about to find out that the danger isn't to the towers, it's to everything beneath and between them. 20 minutes later, the blast wave reaches the Northeast. The atmospheric pressure wave from the impact arrives at the coastal Northeast. This is not a gentle compression. It's a wall of overpressure that has crossed 400 kilometers of open Atlantic in under 20 minutes. Across exposed parts of Long Island and coastal New Jersey, widespread glass failure occurs. Buildings lose facades. Rooftop equipment is damaged. Weaker structures suffer more serious failures. In New York City, glazing fails across entire exposed faces of high-rises. Glass raining down onto streets that are already gridlocked with people trying to evacuate. A driver whose windshield has just imploded steps out into a block where every storefront window has done the same. People who were preparing to leave buildings take shelter inside them from the blast. Thousands who crowded coastal roads abandon damaged vehicles and start running on foot. At hospitals, the first major casualty wave arrives before the water does. Blast injuries, lacerations, and people thrown to the floor by the overpressure. 30 minutes later, the ocean starts rising along Long Island. The first abnormal surges reach the most exposed coast. Around Montauk and the eastern barrier islands, the Atlantic starts behaving impossibly. Water withdraws in some locations, the seafloor exposed, the smell of salt and diesel from suddenly dry marina floors. Elsewhere, the ocean rises without the dramatic withdrawal, simply climbing over beaches and dunes without pause. Some people who climb to the top of dunes after the warnings start filming when the first surge looks survivable. Some walk out onto the exposed seabed. Those decisions become lethal when the larger wave train arrives minutes behind the first. 45 minutes later, Long Island and the Jersey Shore are devastated. The main wave train reaches the open coast. Montauk, Fire Island, Jones Beach, and Long Beach are hammered by surges that don't arrive as a single wall but as successive crests, each one carrying the debris of everything the previous wave tore apart. Barrier islands are completely overwashed. Some are cut through by new inlet channels that didn't exist an hour ago. Beach houses, boardwalks, marinas, and entire low-lying neighborhoods are swept into debris fields, moving at speed across what were streets and parking lots. The Jersey Shore takes the ocean impact directly. Asbury Park, Seaside Heights, and Atlantic City are hit by enormous surges. Atlantic City's casino towers may remain partly standing. They're heavy engineered structures, but the low urban fabric surrounding them is devastated. Parking garages, the boardwalk, the smaller hotels, and residential blocks behind the strip are smashed apart and carried. Water pours through the ground floors of buildings that have been hosting tourists for decades. People on upper hotel floors survive the first wave and reach for stairwells. Emergency alerts order them to stay up. Another surge is coming, and it's larger than the first. 1 hour later, New York City is hit. The wave train pours through the approaches to New York Harbor and spreads across the city's exposed coastline simultaneously. The Rockaway Peninsula is overwhelmed. Low-rise coastal blocks are smashed apart and the debris carried inland. Jamaica Bay floods violently. JFK Airport, sitting on low ground beside the bay, is inundated. Runways disappear underwater. Aircraft and ground equipment are pushed across flooded tarmac. Coney Island and Brighton Beach are struck. Water drives through low Brooklyn neighborhoods carrying whatever it collected from the ocean front. Water races around the Statue of Liberty and into lower Manhattan. Battery Park, the financial district waterfront, and South Street Seaport flood catastrophically. The skyscrapers don't topple, but everything beneath and between them fails. Subway entrances become waterfalls as the surge pours down every stairwell. Electrical rooms and communication systems in basements flood simultaneously. Cars are swept through financial district streets. Inside the system, MTA workers have already cut power to threatened sections, which saves some people from electrocution but leaves thousands moving through dark tunnels and stations. Subway riders climb emergency stairs while water enters the stations below them. Drivers inside the tunnel approaches abandon their cars and run. Ferry crews still in the harbor try to move away from docks before floating debris pins their vessels. Residents in high-rise housing near the coast shelter in upper floors because going into the flooded streets is more dangerous than staying. The surge propagates up the East River, flooding waterfront areas in Brooklyn and Queens. LaGuardia, exceptionally low and water-adjacent, takes severe flooding as the regional water system oscillates. 90 minutes later, the mid-Atlantic coast is hammered. Delaware beaches and Cape May receive destructive waves. Barrier islands and low-vacation communities are overrun. The same pattern that played out on Long Island repeated down the coast. Water pushes into Delaware Bay, where the funnel geometry amplifies the surge as it moves north. Virginia Beach is struck heavily by direct open ocean waves before anything reaches the more sheltered areas behind it. Then the surge enters Hampton Roads. Norfolk, home to the largest naval station in the world, faces major flooding, vessel collisions, and waterfront destruction simultaneously. Warships that weren't moved in time become enormous objects in motion inside a harbor full of debris. Commercial crews trying to hold their vessels at dock find the mooring lines going taut and then snapping as displaced water forces ships broadside against the piers. People who evacuated to multi-story parking structures discover that floating cars, containers, and small boats are smashing into the lower levels with enough force to collapse the ramps. 2 hours later, Cape Cod and Bermuda are struck. Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard receive major impact tsunami waves. Cape Cod, exposed directly to the open Atlantic, is hammered. Provincetown and low coastal communities flood heavily. The wave enters Massachusetts Bay and reaches Boston Harbor, producing destructive surges, waterfront flooding, and damage to port infrastructure and coastal districts. Bermuda takes a direct hit. The island's reefs and bathymetry reshape the wave, but its tiny land area and extensive coastal development make even a reshaped surge catastrophic. St. George's, the harbor districts around Hamilton, coastal roads, and the naval dockyard are hit. L.F. Wade International Airport, much of which sits on extremely low coastal terrain, is inundated. Residents who have high ground use it. Tourists crowd hotel upper floors. Boat owners who tried to leave the harbor when the surge arrived are caught in the worst possible position. 4 hours later, Atlantic Canada, the Bahamas, and the Caribbean feel the impact. Halifax receives strong harbor oscillations and coastal flooding. Newfoundland's Atlantic coast sees destructive wave activity. The Bahamas receive substantial Atlantic-facing waves. Farther south, northern and eastern Caribbean coasts experience varying heights as the wave interacts with island shelves and deep trenches. Ports and marinas far more vulnerable than inland areas. By now, the world has watched footage of New York and New Jersey being struck live. That changes behavior across the Atlantic. Most coastal populations evacuate hours before the wave reaches them, but some return to the waterfront after the first surge, assuming the danger has passed. 8 hours later, Portugal, Spain, and Morocco are hit. The first destructive transatlantic waves reach Western Europe and Northwest Africa. Lisbon faces dangerous surge, entering the Tagus estuary, flooding the waterfront districts that survived Pombal's reconstruction after the 1755 tsunami, the one the city was actually built to remember. Porto and exposed Atlantic communities suffer major waterfront destruction. The Galician coast and Spanish Atlantic ports are hit. The Atlantic coast around Casablanca experiences destructive harbor flooding. Roads away from the coast are packed hours in advance. Fishermen already offshore remain in deep water rather than attempting to enter dangerous harbors. 12 hours later, Ireland and Britain take the final major Atlantic wave. Western and Southern Ireland are struck by destructive wave trains. The southwestern UK, Cornwall, Devon, receives major coastal surges. The Bristol Channel channels oscillations farther inland. The tsunami is weaker here than at the source, but harbors, ports, and low coastal settlements suffer serious destruction. Coastal hospitals have already moved vulnerable patients inland. Some fire and rescue services leave coastal property emergencies unanswered because their crews are themselves evacuated from the response zones. The water has crossed the basin. Now the scale of the American catastrophe is becoming clear. 1 day later, the U.S. East Coast is a national disaster zone. The Northeast and Mid-Atlantic are dealing simultaneously with mass casualties: collapsed and water-damaged buildings, contaminated water supplies, fires from ruptured gas lines, destroyed coastal roads, crippled airports, flooded transit, and disabled ports. Entire sections of the New York subway remain underwater. JFK is non-functional. Large parts of coastal Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island are closed evacuation zones. Lower Manhattan still has its skyline, but much of its subterranean infrastructure is dead. Power isolated, tunnels flooded, communications severed at the basement level. FEMA, the Coast Guard, the National Guard, and military logistics are pushing into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic simultaneously. The Coast Guard conducts rescues wherever waterways are navigable. Emergency air traffic is redirected to functioning inland airports. Residents paint apartment numbers and trapped person counts on rooftops for rescue aircraft. People with intact boats attempt their own rescues until authorities close the water to civilians. The debris fields, fuel contamination, and live electrical hazards are killing people who survived the wave. 3 days later, the Atlantic economy starts breaking. Search teams are still cutting through destroyed communities along Long Island, New Jersey, and the Mid-Atlantic. Repeated tidal cycles redistribute wreckage and contamination. Mass pumping operations have begun in New York's tunnels and underground spaces, but sections cannot be cleared until seawater stops entering through damaged portals. The disruption of New York and New Jersey, Norfolk, Boston, Bermuda, and multiple European Atlantic ports is forcing shipping into surviving terminals. Container traffic backs up. Fuel deliveries reroute. JFK's damage is shifting passenger and cargo aviation inland, overloading airports that weren't designed for the volume. Hotel rooms hundreds of kilometers inland have become long-term accommodation for displaced coastal families who have nowhere to return to. 1 week later, the impact becomes a global environmental event. A 3-kilometer asteroid is not Chicxulub. This is not a mass extinction, but kilometer-class objects can produce global consequences, and the ocean impact has injected enormous quantities of water vapor, salt, chlorine-bearing material, and seabed debris into the upper atmosphere. Atmospheric chemistry is being disturbed. Ozone disruption is measurable. Abnormal haze is appearing at altitude. Atlantic fisheries are heavily disrupted by contamination, sediment, and altered water chemistry across a broad zone around the impact site. Outside the disaster zone, panic buying finally reaches ordinary consumer goods as port closures affect fuel and imported products. Inside what remains of the coastal communities, the valuable commodities are far simpler. Drinkable water, medicine, batteries, and fuel. Nothing else matters yet. 2 weeks later, New York is functioning in pieces. Manhattan's skyline is misleading. Many lower Manhattan towers remain closed because their basements flooded. Electrical systems were destroyed, elevators are inoperative, and subway access doesn't exist. The buildings look intact from above. They're not usable. Large sections of Rockaway, Coney Island, and coastal Staten Island remain wreckage zones that crews are still clearing. JFK requires reconstruction measured in years. Subway tunnels are being pumped, inspected, and cleaned of saltwater, sediment, and debris. Saltwater intrusion makes electrical recovery far harder than simply drying equipment. Entire low coastal communities along New Jersey and Long Island have lost large portions of their building stock. Temporary roads and emergency bridges are under construction where barrier islands and causeways were cut. Residents entering their flooded apartments find that photographs, documents, and possessions survived the wave physically, but are destroyed by saltwater and sewage. Structural engineers, electricians, pump crews, and marine contractors have become some of the most sought-after workers in the Northeast. Every available one is already booked. 1 month later, the Atlantic world is still dealing with the impact. The impact site is only a scar on the seafloor. The coast tells the real story. New York is operational but radically impaired. The Rockaways remain sections of destruction amid ongoing cleanup. JFK is still out or running at minimal emergency capacity. Transatlantic aviation has reorganized around other airports. Lower Manhattan has selectively reopened major buildings while others stay closed because their underground systems are ruined. Subway service is partial, with badly flooded segments requiring reconstruction timelines measured in months. Brooklyn and Queens waterfronts are active demolition zones. Staten Island's South Shore still shows the full scale of what the water did. Parts of the Long Island South Shore have literally changed shape. Barrier islands have new breaches. Whole waterfront neighborhoods no longer match their pre-impact maps. The Jersey Shore remains one of the hardest hit stretches in the country. Atlantic City has its towers, surrounded by enormous areas of demolished lower development. Norfolk and Hampton roads are rebuilding port and naval infrastructure. Cape Cod and Boston are repairing severe coastal damage. Bermuda remains dependent on external logistics after major damage to its harbors, coastal roads, and aviation infrastructure. Across the Atlantic, Portugal, Morocco, Ireland, Britain, Canada, and Caribbean countries are rebuilding damaged coastal infrastructure. Atmospheric chemistry remains disturbed and is being monitored globally. Ozone readings over parts of the northern hemisphere are abnormal. Atlantic shipping has reorganized around surviving ports. Insurance and financial losses are running into the hundreds of billions. The asteroid missed New York by 400 kilometers. For millions of people along the Atlantic, that distance turned out to mean almost nothing.